All right. Good day, everyone. My name's Damian Brady, and thanks for coming. Has everybody had lunch yet? Not quite. It's pretty good down there. Much better conference food than what I'm used to. So today I'm going to be talking about end-to-end DevOps on the Microsoft stack. And I'm going to be showing all the way through from file new project all the way through to something running in production with some monitoring on it. And we're going to do that inside 45 minutes. So a couple of days ago I did the same session, but I had an hour. So I'm going to be a bit quicker this time. Luckily, the actual work only takes a few minutes. It's very easy to set up. But on the way, I'm going to be using Microsoft stuff, but I'm going to be pointing out that there are other options if you already have investments in other products. So yes, Microsoft does a really good job from end to end, but if you've already invested in some other tooling, Microsoft works really well with that tooling as well. So first up, a little bit about me. I am a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. You can get hold of me at DamoVisa on Twitter. And I'm reliably told that my job title is an advocate, which means apparently in this country I now have a law degree. Is that right? Yep, good. I wasn't sure whether that would actually land, but anyway. So before I worked at Microsoft, I worked at Octopus Deploy. Does anybody know Octopus Deploy? Yep, a few hands. And before that, I did consulting. So I used to go out to companies and help them with their developer process and basically do all the DevOps and Agile stuff before DevOps was really a word, especially in Microsoft spheres. I'm also, you've probably noticed that I'm not from here. I'm actually from Australia, but I'm living in Toronto at the moment, in Canada. But I do a lot of Australian things like beach volleyball, I surf. I get injured a lot from surfing and beach volleyball, and I dodge dangerous creatures a lot. I really like to travel, which is great because that's part of this job. This is actually the first time I've been outside the airport in Amsterdam, but about the third time I've been in Amsterdam. It's nice outside the airport. I'm also a member of this team at Microsoft under Donovan Brown. I know Donovan visited Europe not long ago, actually. Did anyone see him while he was here? Yep. Wow, some real strong hands up the back too. Yeah, so I'm with a team with Donovan, Steve Moraski, who is from Chef on the left, and then, sorry, on the right, and Abel Wang as well, who's from Microsoft as well. So we talk a lot about DevOps, but we're part of a larger team of cloud developer advocates who have a ton of people, really, really smart people, especially in the open source field. So Jesse Frizzell just joined us, Brian Kettleson and Ashley McNamara from the Go community as well. There's a ton of really, really well-known people in that group. John Papa and Scott Kate as well are part of that group. So that website there has profiles of all of those people as well, and we're trying to push the message as well that Microsoft stuff is not just about Microsoft. If you're doing open source development, if you're doing Node, if you're doing Go, if you're doing PHP, whatever you're doing, Microsoft has a good solution for it as well. So check that out. All right, so let's talk about DevOps. You've probably seen this slide before if you've seen any Microsoft people speaking. This is Microsoft's definition of what DevOps is. It's a union of people, process, and products in order to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. The really important part here is continuous delivery of value, right? Value is the thing that we want to actually deliver. So value does not mean taking a ticket from the left-hand side of your Scrum board and moving it to the right. That doesn't necessarily equal value. If you write a new feature but nobody uses it, then you haven't delivered any value. And similarly, it's not just code as well. Like if you have a sale period, like a post-Christmas sales, do they do those here? No? Okay. Whenever sales happen in stores, right, you'll get a whole lot more people like visiting those stores and visiting your online stores. You need to be able to increase your load. So value could simply be scaling out your web application, right? There's no code written for that necessarily. It's just value delivered. So the important part here is delivering that value continuously, not every 3 months when there's a deployment, not every 6 months, or not when the business decides that bug fix is appropriate to go out now. You want that bug fix in production as soon as you have it, right? That's continuously delivering value. And that's where we get continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, which we're going to do now. So another way of thinking about DevOps is kind of this cycle, right? Of everything from your planning, so planning the work that you're going to do, to writing that, testing it, make sure it works, deploying it out to production, and then just as importantly, monitoring what happens in production so you can feed that back into your planning cycle. So DevOps isn't a start to finish thing, it's much more of a cycle, right? So we're going to touch on all of these different areas during the demo today. We're going to look at work item tracking for planning. We're going to look at actually writing the code and then testing it. We're going to deploy all the way through to a site in Azure, and then we're going to do a little bit on monitoring to feed that back into our planning cycle as well. Microsoft, by the way, is kind of the only company that has an end-to-end solution for all of this DevOps stuff, so all the way through that cycle. Everything from kind of source control, a continuous deployment, feedback, team collaboration, all the way through to monitoring and feeding back into that cycle. There is a solution that Microsoft offers, and we're the only ones who do that. However, like I said, you don't have to use the whole Microsoft stack. If you already have investments in other products, these can slot in anywhere at this point. And I'll show you a few points while we're going through, and some products as well that you can slot into this cycle really, really easily. All right, that's enough talking. I think that's enough slides in general for a 45-minute session. And we are, what are we, 6-7 minutes down, which is excellent. So let's go to demo. Let me zoom in a bit, actually. Can everybody read that, or is that a bit small? Bit small? Let me use this little tool. There we go. It makes everything bigger. Okay, hopefully that should be big enough to read. So I'm going to do a file new project. We're going to start right from scratch. File new project. And I'm going to use an ASP.NET Core application, but there's no reason that it has to be ASP.NET Core. It's just the demo works really smoothly with ASP.NET Core, so I'm going to do that. Demo Core. And one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable, sorry, let me do that again. I am going to check this checkbox, create a new Git repository. Now, it's important to note that this just creates a Git repository locally. This doesn't do anything with any servers anywhere. Right, so I just have a local repository here. This is basically exactly the same as getting a git ignore file that knows how to treat Visual Studio and then doing git init. It doesn't do any more than that. So there's no server connection at the moment at all. So let's click OK. And I'm going to choose this present on thing. Kind of screws up these dialogues a little bit. But I'm going to use ASP.NET Core 1.1. And I'm going to use a model view controller. I'm not going to enable Docker support, but you can easily do that. If you haven't seen Docker support in Visual Studio, it basically means that when you press F5, rather than running in IIS Express or something like that, you can actually create a Docker container and spin it up in Docker locally. But that's probably going to add a bit too much complexity, so I'll leave that one unchecked. No authentication as well. So it's going to create this new project. It's basically just a standard ASP.NET Core application. We get a nice start page as well, which is good. And we can see, yeah, this is a standard ASP.NET Core application. You'll see we get the little icons to say that this is checked in. But that's just locally. We don't have this on the server. So this is kind of the first point at which we want to start introducing a bit of DevOps. And source control and being able to allow the rest of your team to work nicely together is kind of a key part of that. So this is only local at the moment. So let's go, let's kill this file. Let's go to Team Explorer, and we will go to, we'll go to Sync. And it gives us a one-click publish Git repo. So I'm logged into Visual Studio at the moment under my Microsoft account. So it knows who I am. It knows what visualstudio.com services that I have, or what visualstudio.com instances I have. If we go actually to visualstudio.com itself, oops. Jumping ahead. If we go to visualstudio.com itself, the only thing I've done ahead of time is this get started for free and fill in my details. So I'm already logged in, I already have some new ones, but I can create a new account. So if you don't have a VSTS, a Visual Studio Team Services account already, this is all you need to do. Just go to visualstudio.com and sign up that way. But I've already done that, so I've got a demo, MS Demos Visual Studio. I'm creating a new repository, which is named just after my Visual Studio project. So I'm going to click Publish Repository, and it's going to use that demo-ms-demos to create a new team project in visualstudio.com. So if we jump back to visualstudio.com, Actually, let's just go straight there. We can see that it's created this project, this demo core project. Now that didn't exist before. It's part of this creation that's happening from Visual Studio. And we've done that. We can actually jump straight to the code inside our visualstudio.com instance, demo ms demos. And now we have everything in source control. Right? So the rest of our team can start working on that project. Now we've got the code in source control, but we need to build it as well. So continuous integration is really important for making sure that the code that I write and the code that everybody else writes works really well together, right? So you need to be able to merge that code, build it successfully, run tests, and make sure all of that works as well. And it's even prompting me that I need to set up a build here. So let's do that. Set up a build. I love how it creates a new tab every time I do anything. All right. Create a new build. I can start with an empty template if I know exactly what steps I need to use to build, but I'm using ASP.NET Core, and so there's a template for that already. So let's apply that template, and we can see that we've got a process here which does a .NET Restore, .NET Build, .NET Test, .NET Publish, and then the output of that, which turns out to be a zip file, gets pushed back to visualstudio.com or to VSTS so that I have access to that when I want to actually release it. I have to set one more thing up, which is the queue that this runs on. So when VSTS actually does a build, it offloads that to an agent that runs on a machine somewhere. Now you don't necessarily have to set that agent up yourself. There are hosted agents that VSTS will provide for you. There's 3 that you have access to. There's a standard hosted agent, which I think has Visual Studio, but an earlier version, like a really stable version on it. Or you can choose the VS 2017 version, or you can run it on Linux. So I'm writing .NET Core here. I could run this build on Linux as well, and it will work because it's just a .NET command line tool, which is cross-platform. I also have my own private build, and this is just an agent that runs on a virtual machine that I have in Azure. I've done this purely for speed purposes. When you choose a hosted agent, it's not slow, but it does spin up a new machine for you, a new virtual machine, pull down the code, does a NuGet restore if you need that as well. And that bit can be a little bit slow. NuGet restores and npm restores kind of slow things down. My local one that I have, this default queue, is just a bit faster because I've done that before. So I'm going to choose that as my queue. I'm going to save and queue this. So it'll create a new build right from what I have. And we can follow that through exactly what that build looks like. Now the good thing about this is even though the agent might be running on a different machine, I see all of the logs that happen as that build is running. So nothing's hidden from you at all. These logs come straight from that target machine, that build agent that's running, and get pushed back to VSTS so I can see what's happening. Now I only have one phase here, but if I had different phases, I could run different phases on different agents as well. So maybe I have an agent running on a Mac that does my OS X build for my mobile application. I could have that running in a different phase on a different agent. Or I maybe have a different phase for testing just to separate these things out and run that on my test machine, for example. Okay, so we've only got one phase. It's done a restore, build, test, publish. We've seen all of the logs that happen. We can download those logs if we want to. We can have a look at the artifacts that were produced, and you can see this drop folder. So that was the last step, was to push up the results into a drop folder, and in there is just our zip file. So when we want to actually deploy this, if we really wanted to, we could grab that zip file and deploy it to a local machine, but better to actually set up a continuous release as well. So let's go to the Releases tab and set one of those up. Now I'm going to deploy this to an Azure app service, simply because it's quite easy to run ASP.NET Core apps there. So let's do a new definition. And once again, I can start with an empty process if I know exactly how I want to deploy this, or I'm just doing an Azure App Service deployment so I can choose that template. Now the template's not very complicated, it just has one step in it. And let's call this our test environment. So we've got one phase. Again, we can separate these into phases, run them on different agents if we want to. And that one phase has this one Azure App Service. I need to set up a couple of settings here, and one is the Azure subscription that I'm going to use. And again, because I'm logged into VSTS, it knows who I am, it knows my Microsoft account, so it knows what Azure subscriptions I have access to as well. So let's choose the global demos. And because this is running on a different agent, it needs permission to be able to talk to Azure on my behalf. Now, the really good thing about VSTS and Azure is they work really closely together. So all I have to do is click authorize, and that whole handshaking, giving tokens to the to release management, and allowing that stuff to happen kind of happens automatically. It takes a few seconds to do, but by contrast, I used Octopus Deploy to do this demo a while ago, and it's a little bit more tricky to get that communication between Azure and Octopus. Obviously, you only have to do it once, but at least with VSTS, with release management, you can just click that button and it's done. All right, so let's choose the app service name that we want, and here you'll see exactly how many demos our Cloud Developer Advocate team does. Demo test, core test, there we go. So I've actually already set up an Azure app service. That was pretty straightforward. Oh, good, that's a good sign. That was pretty straightforward. I basically went to Azure, created a brand new app service, and made it a Windows one. There's not really anything running on it at the moment. Or there is. There's actually the previous version of this demo running on it, but let's pretend that there's nothing. So we have this Azure app service, demo core test.azure websites. So that's the one I'm going to choose. I'm going to deploy to that app service. Oops. So we want to do one more thing, and that's to configure the artifact itself. So right now we don't actually have anything that we're deploying. So let's add the artifact that came from that build. And it's going to identify that yes, there is a drop that comes from that. So that's all I need to do. And I'm going to set this up as a continuous deployment trigger as well. So what that means is my continuous integration build. So every time I do a build, it will build my application, produce a drop file. And by checking this, every single time that build completes and I get a new artifact, my release will run it, and it will release it to Azure as well. Now that'll happen automatically because I have this pre-deployment condition which says after a release, so in other words, whenever it's ready, I go to that test site. But if I wanted to, I could set up individual users to have to approve that deployment to test. So this is important probably for production or for a QA site. I was talking to somebody the other day that has a QA environment. So they have a pre-deployment condition that says somebody in the QA team must approve this to go to the QA environment. And then at the end, somebody in the QA team must approve that this is good enough to go to the next environment. So you can have pre-deployment approvers and also post-deployment approvers. So you can say, yes, this is okay to go to this environment, and yes, this has succeeded in this environment. If the right users don't approve that, then it can't move on in this pipeline. So we've only got one environment there, and it's going to go automatically. So let's just save this. And one thing I skipped, which I'm just going to jump back to really quickly, is this is all .NET stuff. I'm coming from Visual Studio, I have ASP.NET applications, and I'm pulling that artifact from here. But if I wanted to pull my artifact from, for example, a Jenkins build or something like that, I have a lot of options here as well. And in fact, last time I did this demo, which was literally the day before yesterday, Docker Hub wasn't in here. So they update this thing a little bit too frequently for us people doing demos. It's always very scary when you go to the site and something's different. Anyway, Docker Hub is now an option. So if a new image gets pushed to Docker, you can trigger a new release and use that image for something else. But if I'm using Jenkins, I can use that. If I'm using my own on-site Team Foundation version control instance, I can do that. And external Git and GitHub are kind of out of the box. If I'm using something like TeamCity, there's an extension that I can install from the Visual Studio Marketplace, which will add TeamCity as an appropriate place to get artifacts as well. Similarly for the build. So that build definition that I have, I haven't changed anything really. So that build definition I have, I'm getting my code from Visual Studio Team Services itself, but if I wanted to get it from GitHub or from somewhere else, that is an option out of the box as well. So in Get Sources, I'm using this project, but I could use GitHub, Bitbucket, a remote Git repository, or Subversion as well. So I can pull those artifacts in from wherever I want. And in fact, I can do it during my build process as well. So if I had an artifact in Jenkins, in a Jenkins build that I wanted to pull into my VSTS build, I could add that as a step in my build process. So I can pull from all of these other tools that I might have existing investments in. I'm not tied to just using VSTS end to end. It's very much a different Microsoft than it used to be. It used to be the case that if you used one Microsoft product, you had to use them all. Right? If you're using TFS, then you're writing .NET, you're deploying to a Windows server. It's definitely not the case anymore. If I'm doing Node, for example, there's a Node tool installer, Gulp, NPM is an out-of-the-box step. If I'm doing containers, Docker steps are out of the box. These are not extensions. These are things that Microsoft has written for that community. I think even Kubernetes is out of the box now. So this is just part of what Microsoft is doing now. They're really embracing open source and letting you use the tooling for whatever language, whatever platform, and whatever environment you're deploying to. Anyway, I thought I would point that one out. So we've got our continuous integration build and we've got our continuous deployment. So rather than actually trigger these like manually through VSTS, I'm going to make a code change. Now, I don't actually have any work that I need to do at the moment. There's nothing in my backlog. So let's configure some work that we want to do. So here's our backlog. I'm actually going to switch to the board view, which is very much like a Kanban board. I'm going to ignore the sprints at the moment, but you can also set these up in sprints. And if you're doing Scrum or something like that, you can set the dates for the sprints and see the board for those particular sprints and do the work that way as well. I don't have anything in this sprint, so it's giving me that warning. I'm just going to jump back to backlog items in this board. Let's create a new one, which is update text on homepage. So that task is going to be created, hopefully. And I'm going to assign that to me, for example. So now we've got this new task. I can drag this around the board. And by the way, this works really well on touchscreens too. I'm on a Mac, so I only get this tiny little bar of touchscreen, which is a whole different story. I'm going to leave that alone. Anyway, so I've got this task. And you can customize this board too. So you have a lot of control over what this looks like. I'm going to add this ID field to it because I like seeing the ID in there. It also helps a little bit later on. I can also add fields to there as well. So I could say, for example, the assigned to one is already there, but let's say we want a created date field in the card as well. So I can see whatever I want to see of that card in here. So it's really good for managing the work that I'm doing. You can even go further and modify the style and have styling rules to say, for example, if it's a bug, then I want to say anything which matches this criteria. So the field could be, in a particular area path, then color that thing, where is it? Color this red, for example. So I have a lot of control over how this board looks. It's not just whatever I get out of the box. All right, how do I delete this? Delete, there we go. So I'm just going to leave it like this. We've got this one task, update text on the home page. And if I'm working in Visual Studio as well, I can see these work items based on queries right from Visual Studio. So that's cool. Let me just connect again. Work items. Oh, good. Connecting. One or more errors occurred. That's great. Let me refresh, see if that does anything. Nope. I'm going to try this for just a second and see if this will actually fix it. Otherwise, we'll just move on. Okay. Let's forget about that. Let's just make this change and see if I can assign it when I get there. Ooh, that's really big. Oops. All right, so that task was to modify the text on the home page, right? So let's just replace this whole carousel with something else. And we'll make it just a link to Azure or something like that. So let's do a div class equals well, and then we'll do Azure. All right, and like any good developer, I'm not even going to run this. I'm just going to commit and push. So let's that's going to work, right? Updated banner. Now, let's see if I can do this because that didn't like connecting for some reason. This is ID number 12. Now remember I said that I like that on the board because I can see exactly what it is. If I wanted to, if this worked, I could choose a particular query. Yep, and it's not connecting. I could choose a particular query and say, show me all of the tasks that belong to that query. But instead, I'm going to manually assign 12, and I'm guessing this isn't going to work. Oh, there we go. All right, cool. Demos are fun. All right, so I have this task, update text on homepage. So I'm linking the work that I'm doing to a particular work item, to something that's on my backlog. I'm going to put in a comment, update a banner, and I'm going to commit and push. Now what this will do is it'll link that change that I've actually made to the work item itself, but it'll also trigger a build because we have that continuous integration turned on and continuous deployment as well. So it'll trigger that build, which in turn will create an artifact which will trigger a deployment, which will go all the way through to Azure. So let's follow that through, and this is pretty quick. I'm just going to jump into this one and show you that that link exists. So if we go and see what's linked here, we can see that that work item, that commit itself is linked to that work item. So I can see how that, I can go directly to the code that actually changed in there. So I have that kind of traceability of what happened. In my build, let's go to builds. This has already succeeded. Okay, I'm too slow. But in that build, did that run? Oh, you know what I didn't do? I didn't configure continuous integration. Let me edit that build definition and show you how to do that. It's very, very complicated. Trigger enabled. Save. So I'm going to save and queue. If that was enabled before I checked in my code, then it would have done this automatically. But let's just queue that manually. The continuous deployment should still work though, because it's going to actually create an artifact at the end of this. So this build's going to run. Let's just pretend it ran as a result of my changing my code rather than manually triggering it. And I'll do one in a second just to show you that this actually does work. So that's the build completed. And then if we go to releases, we should see that there's a release already created. It's currently waiting to go into that first environment, but it will do that in a second if I double click. And the same thing happens here. It's in progress, so it's actually doing that work. And the same thing with the build, where we saw all of the logs that actually happened. We see all the logs in the release as well. So all of that stuff happens on those same agents. You can use the hosted agent, which I think I'm actually doing here, or you can use your local agent or any agent that you install on all of your machines. So I'm going to, just while this is running, it's not going to affect this actual build, but just to make things a little bit faster, I'm going to change the agent that is being used. An agent, rather than the hosted one, I'm going to use my default one, which will be faster for next time. But that actual release itself is going to continue to run to our test environment, and it's succeeded. So if I jump back to Azure, I should be able to click on that link, and we'll see that that change has actually propagated. What did I say? Azure is awesome, right? So that's what should happen. There we go, in huge text right there. So we got that kind of end-to-end, if I'd remembered to enable continuous integration, we got that end-to-end kind of whenever I committed my code, it should do a build, then does a release and goes all the way through to production. Now, you probably don't want everything to go to production immediately. So in your release definition, you probably want a different environment, like another environment like test. So we can clone that and create a new production environment, for example. That will do exactly the same tasks. So what I would normally do is change the app service name, so actually deploy to a different app service. You can also deploy to slots as well. So if I had a staging slot and a production slot, I could deploy to my staging slot, and then my production deployment could simply be a VIP swap between staging and production, if I wanted to do that. In general, and this is just a word of warning as well, if you have multiple slots on the same app service, they physically run on the same hardware. So don't do your load testing in a different slot on your production environment, right? I would use slots just to swap at the last minute, verify that everything's okay, and then swap it to production. So I have that control as well. I'm just going to delete that because we're going to do another. So we're going to do another deployment just to prove that it actually works. Right, so one thing that I'll show you as well is when we look at the releases here, actually I already had that open. If we look at this release, we get that link to the work item as well. So the, not commits, sorry, the work item that I wrote in that code. So that connection has flowed all the way through from the commit to the build and then to the release. If I'd done more than one release, for example, this would be a drop-down telling me that I can compare what's happened between release number 5 and release number 10, which is handy if not everything goes all the way through to production. So you can have a list of everything that's actually changed in between those two environments. All right, let's do one more thing really quickly and show you a couple of things in this app service here. There's a continuous delivery tab in Azure itself. And because I set this up as a continuous deployment from VSTS, that actually gets exposed right from Azure. So if I'm an IT pro and I'm managing our infrastructure in Azure, I can see these builds as they occur in right from Azure itself. I even get deep links to the build that is currently running in the different slots for this app service as well. So I can link directly to not only the build itself and the release definition, but even to the version of the code, to the commit that resulted in this build, and I can see exactly what happened with that release to production. So if my monitoring shows that that last release made a big impact on CPU or usage or something like that, that information can be tracked all the way back to the change that was made really quickly. I haven't really talked too much about that monitoring coming back as well. So it's worth mentioning that Application Insights is available for this stuff as well. And App Insights, I've actually already got this tied in to this app service. You can see all of the individual requests that occurred. Any kind of metrics as well. So let's go to the full App Insights just to see what's in here. So you can see all sorts of stuff, the overview. Here's our timeline of everything that's happened, the server responses and so on. And if you want to do things like A/B testing and funnels and all that good marketing stuff to work out whether people are using your application the way you want them to, that's in here as well. So you can choose, for example, the pages that have been slow. I think, where is it? Funnels. You can actually set up funnels, like say, I expect people to go in this direction in my application. What percentage of people, when they land on this page, go all the way through to this other page? Really handy for marketing, user flows and things like that as well. One more thing which I'm going to try and do, and this is kind of going off script, but I figure everything's worked so well so far, right? Let's go to our About page and let's throw a new exception in here. Oh no. This is how I write code, by the way. I explicitly throw exceptions rather than doing it accidentally. So let's do that. Let's make a change, commit and push. So I'm going to push that all the way through, and while that's running, let's just make sure that it's actually created a build this time. Yep, there is one which hasn't started yet, so that build's going to run in a second. So while this is running, it's going to push all the way through to our test site in Azure. Automatically, it's going to do the build, it's going to do the release, and it's going to go through. And Application Insights will start to track this stuff as well. I'm going to hit that About page a few times to get some exceptions, so we can see what kind of work that does as well. But while that's running, we have a minute or so. Does anybody have any questions about what I've shown so far? Nope, everything is completely straightforward. Excellent. Luckily, this doesn't take too long to run. And I'll show you as well, if you have a look at the summary of this build, you get that traceability in the build too. So we can see the actual change that was made, and we can even see the link to the release. So all the way through this process, you get these links of where stuff came from and where it's going to as well. So full end-to-end traceability. Let's look at that build, sorry, that release, see if that's actually going to work. Let's have a look at the logs. All right, so it's deploying the Azure App Service. Great, it's done that. If we go back here and refresh, Hopefully our about page should throw an exception when this spins up for the first time. And we'll start to see those exceptions come up in application insights as well. So we can start seeing that there are errors in there. Great. So that error occurred. Let's just do that a couple more times just to make sure there's a few exceptions in there for app insights. So back in application insights, if we have a look at our overview, it should start feeding in exceptions. Where are errors, failures? Nope, hasn't got it yet. Was that sorry? Oh, where? Oh, I do. You're right. I missed it. Let's see if we can find. The actual exceptions themselves. I can't see. This is why you don't go off script, because I can't find exactly where they are. Oh, there was? Oh, yeah, there we go. Thank you. So we've got our exceptions. Overall count? Nope. I'm not seeing it. Any hints, anyone? Exception rate. All right. Let's go to the application map. That one's kind of cool. Here we go. We can see some failures here. Let's click to investigate these failures. There we go. So we can see a few exceptions, and we can see this system exception occurred at, sorry for not finding that immediately. We can see the system exception occurred in the about controller. So that what I hovered over there, you can see it's happened in controllers, home controller about. Now I didn't add anything to my code. I didn't add application insights to my code. I just configured it from Azure itself. So I added this in Azure. It started instrumenting my application without changing the code that I've got at all. We can see as well these exceptions individually, and I can even drill into them specifically and get the entire call stack of what happened. Now this is cool. I've got this exception that I can see in Azure, but I want to feed this back into the work that I'm doing. So I can create a new work item right from Azure. So first I need to configure the link to VSTS. What is it? Demo, MS demos? Yep. VisualStudio.com. I need the HTTPs. And my project is demo core. Is that right? Area I need to set as well. Oh, sorry, I need to authorize that. And again, this is kind of the two-way integration between Azure and VSTS. So I should be able to do that pretty quickly. Redirecting, and in the meantime, I'll just check what this area path is. Let's just make it demo core. Great. Oops. And back in Azure. There we go, we should be authorized. Oh, wow. By the way, I found in Azure that integration between the two of them, that authorization thing doesn't really return very nicely, which is a problem, but they know about this. So let's just kill that again. Oops. What OS am I on? Create a new work item. Go back one. What did I say about going off script? It's a good idea. Demo core test. This will work, I promise, it'll work. App insights I need. application map. So by the way, the application map is really cool. It gives you what happens on the client as well as what happens on the server. So, and if you are using things like storage services, you'll have another link there as well, and you can see how all of these things connect together. It's very cool. So let's go to that exception. We'll choose this guy. Add a new work item. Are we authorized? Nope. So when I'm going to leave this because we're running out of time. But when you've configured that integration between the two of them, I just haven't set up that connection between the two of them. You can create a work item and it will actually create a new bug or a new work item, whatever you want to actually use. So you can choose the work item type that you want to use, and it will create that in VSTS itself, and you can start fixing that bug, link it back to that work item, and get that full cycle of everything that comes through. All right. Next time, don't go off script. Any questions about how that works, even though I've shown you that it didn't? It does, trust me. Just need to authorize it. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was about testing, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the question was about integration testing and how do we take the files during the build? Anything that tests depend on during the build. So any resources or any testing that you need to do, you can do during the build definition. If you have external resources, are we talking like test data and things like that? So the fallback, so there's a ton of these tasks that are out of the box in your build definition. These are available in your release definition as well. It's a ton of stuff that comes out of the box. If it's not a task that already exists, then the marketplace is likely to have it. Every time I go to this page, this number increases. So there's 354 build and release related extensions that I can add. And they can add other things like Octopus Deploy and all sorts of stuff like that. But if that task isn't there, things like pulling a file from a particular location. So I can upload with FTP, what else? File, archive files, Azure file copy files around, decrypt files, things like that. If I don't have a step that does exactly what I need, I can always fall back to writing PowerShell or Bash, like a shell script, or anything like that. So if there is a task as part of your thing to pull some resources from somewhere else, see if Git, no. If there is a task that you need to run as part of your build to pull resources from somewhere else, you can just include that as either your own script or a marketplace extension might have that for you. So you can basically do anything you want in this build definition. And the same goes for the release definition. You might want to do that load testing, for example, in another environment. So if we edit this build definition, we should be able to see these different environments. I could add another environment. Actually, let's not do that. Let's clone this one. And let's say this is our QA environment. I could add tasks to this process to do things like a cloud-based load test in this environment, for example. I can also change where that is in the pipeline. So maybe I want to do that alongside the actual dev or the test deployment. So deploy to a couple of environments at the same time, run load testing on my QA environment, and maybe pull files from somewhere else, from GitHub or something like that, to use in my QA environment. In the release as well, you can add artifacts from elsewhere. So if you had these in a Git repository somewhere, like the test data in a different Git repository, you could add that as an artifact and then use that artifact in that QA environment if you wanted to as well. So load testing, UI testing, things like that is really great to do as part of your release cycle. But if it's integration testing like web tests and things like that, they can occur in your build definition or your release definition or any of those. Awesome. Cool. All right. I only got 24 seconds. All right, so I just wanted to refresh you on this one. All of these items here are things that are provided by Microsoft. Microsoft has a solution for everything in that DevOps lifecycle. But if you aren't using the Microsoft stuff, you can substitute pretty much anywhere in that life cycle. So if you're using different tooling for build, for release, for your source control, for monitoring, there's really good integration points for a lot of those as well. And that is all I had to show you. Thank you.